Good evening and welcome to One on One. Now, this is a program in which everything is considered. A program dedicated to bringing you newsmakers, movers and shakers who are making the news and who are in the news themselves. My guest tonight is Mr. Harald Hecht, Chairman of the Forum of German-Speaking Namibians. Good evening, sir, and welcome to One on One.
Good evening, Mr. Kisting. I really appreciate the platform and thank you very much for the invitation.
Mr. Hecht, the Forum for German-Speaking Namibians was founded barely 6 months ago. Now, the question is, what is the essence of this forum? What exactly is its purpose?
Okay, I have to go back a little bit. There have been talks already since August 2019 by members of the German-speaking community in Swakopmund and also in Windhoek that we need to form a platform where we gather the opinions of the German-speaking community of Namibia and where we ultimately engage in dialogue with all Namibians. There have also been calls from prominent politicians, none other than the former President Hifikepunye Pohamba, who said the Germans are a tribe without a chief, and Hage Geingob, our current President, His Excellency Hage Geingob, has repeatedly called on all Namibians to become and take up their rightful positions in the Namibian House. So we are basically acceding to these calls, and also we realize that there has been a vacuum. The last political organization, if I can call it that the German-speaking Namibians had was the Interessengemeinschaft Deutschsprachiger Südwester, which had just one sole aim, and that is to bring about independence to Namibia. And when that was peacefully achieved in 1991, that organization was disbanded. So for 30 years, we've been actually voiceless, but at the same time, we realized that we've been instrumental, in the private sector, in commerce as such. And as such, we see a specific civil responsibility to become engaged for a better Namibia,
Yes, sir.
For keeping the peace and stability in Namibia. And this is basically the essence of our organization, is to be seen, to be heard. We obviously also want to hear everybody else in Namibia, because there are sensitive issues currently which we have to address.
Thank you, sir. I'm happy you're acknowledging the vacuum that has been existing. Just for the record, the country attained independence in 1990 already, not 1991. Some are of the view that German-speaking Namibians have been absent for such a long time, not present in most activities of the country. Is that also your view thus?
That's also our view. Yes, we realized, we acknowledged that independence was 1990, but what I said is that former body dissolved shortly after independence in 1991. So yes, the vacuum has been there for a good 30 years. And we realized that. That was unanimous. All the members that took part in establishing the forum, whether it be in Windhoek or in Swakop, and ultimately we decided on one joint body, the Forum of German-Speaking Namibians. We were unanimous that we need to be visible, we need to be heard, we need to engage. We can't just sit back in our comfort zone and enjoy the peace and stability of Namibia and carry on with our economic activities. We've got to give something back into the country.
What do you attribute the long-standing absence to?
Well, what you call it? Is that we were probably stuck in our comfort zone, in the sense that economically things went very well, with the Namibian constitution still allowing us our rights and privileges of our German culture. We're still celebrating things like an Oktoberfest and a German carnival. We've got a German radio service. We've got German private schools. So we've been enjoying those privileges. And then one also has to say that the first 20-25 years of independence were really very stable. But already before the establishment of the forum in the last 3-4 years, we've had economic challenges, okay? And a lot of our youth are going for further their education in Europe or South Africa or overseas for that matter, and do not necessarily return. So we see a little bit of a brain drain because there might not be the future that they expect.
Is it your observation that things are no longer stable, as you called it?
No, I'm not saying that. I think I say that things are still very stable, and we really appreciate it. But I think we got to invest more goodwill into the relationships of all our brothers and sisters in Namibia, all the ethnic tribes, all the various realities that we've got in this country. And we need to strive more to the principle of one Namibia, one nation.
Speaking of which, sir, according to you, one way of becoming more visible is by promoting dialogue with all cultural groups in Namibia. Was this decision to get involved perhaps prompted by the recent offer from Germany to Namibia? Do you intend to capitalize on the reparations?
I wouldn't like to take the word capitalize. I wouldn't like to use that, but definitely we've become more known, and the joint declaration that was signed on 15 May, just 3 weeks after our forum was established, obviously has prompted us that we've become more visible overnight, that people are seeking conversations with us and interviews with us. But I must say the forum already started seeing the need in August 2019, and at that time the conclusion of the genocide matter was not really on the cards, but we knew that one day it would become a topic, definitely.
In an interview not too long ago, sir, you mentioned, and I quote, that this forum intends to reduce the gap of structural inequality in the country. What exactly do you mean by this, bearing in mind that some are of the view that the structural inequality referred to by you was brought about by colonial masters like Germany in the first instance?
Germany in the first instance, then we had apartheid, and now we've had 30 years of independence and various consequences flowing from these three eras. I'm the first one to confess that the German-speaking community of Namibia is privileged. Now, from a human point of view, what do I do with these privileges? What saddens me is that the Gini coefficient seems to be growing and the gap seems to be widening every year when the statistics are being released. The level of poverty in this country seems to increase. There's been a statistic revealed that the level of poverty has increased by 20% over the last 5 years. Now, COVID-19 has accelerated this whole unfortunate sequence of events, and I am of the firm conviction that in order to keep the social peace in this country, we got to acknowledge the facts. And the facts are that the inequalities are overwhelmingly structurally related, and we need to address them. And we've had a thought that we want to organize a think tank where we get prominent experts from the economic sectors, politicians, sociologists, what a difficult word, people that deal with sociology, of the government, but also of the business community, and that we try and first understand the issues at hand and look at recipes. You know, if you've got a blood loss, you must do something instantly to stop the blood loss. And then after that, you must look at how do I prevent a blood loss in the first place. Okay? Currently, we've got a blood loss. The blood loss is the poor people, people with inadequate housing. So Namibia's independence has been good to a lot of people, but not everybody's been a winner.
Mr. Hecht, before we take a brief break, you shared with us earlier that the forum's talks for the forum had been ongoing for a while, long before it's coming into being in 2021. Would you say that German-speaking Namibians were involved in the negotiations for the reparations in any way?
Now, I can categorically state that none of the German-speaking community of Namibia was directly involved in the talks. And also the Forum of German-speaking Namibians, we do not regard ourselves, do not want to be seen as an extension of the German government. So I just really would like to clarify that.
What does not directly involved mean?
I think the German embassy invited a few members of the German-speaking community before the whole process started and said this is going to be a bilateral agreement or bilateral negotiations, and basically just to notify. But none of the German-speaking community members of Namibia were directly represented in the negotiations team.
It's time for a brief break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is your weekly dose of one-on-one with me, Denver Kisting. Our guest tonight is Mr. Harald Hecht, Chairman of the Forum of German-Speaking Namibians. Now, sir, do you think that Germany did well in the recent offer of 18.4 billion for crimes committed in the 1904 to 1908 genocide?
This is a very complex and very sensitive question, and the whole issue is obviously very sensitive and complex. I just have to reiterate that. Now, let's leave the monetary part maybe aside, but it's not that I'm dodging my responsibility. We can talk about the monetary part because I'm an accountant. I've got my own views on that. But basically, what we've achieved in the joint declaration is that three things, which I think are key answers to the resolution that the late Paramount Chief Gwama Riroako, when he lodged the motion in 2006 in the National Assembly. And the three key objectives have been achieved in the sense that Germany acknowledges that it is a genocide from today's perspective. They are offering an apology. And thirdly, they are offering financial compensation. They are not using the word reparation. Now, if you look at the amount, to get back to your actual question, of 1.1 billion euros, which at today's exchange rate is 18 billion Namibian dollars, as has been quoted rightfully in the press, it is very difficult to judge that amount, because how do you quantify a human life? Can you ever make good financially the damages that have been inflicted to the affected and the victimized communities? The biggest problem that I've got, and the amount seems to be rejected by everybody in Namibia, even our government of the day has rejected the financial offer. But there is...
While talks remain underway.
While talks remain underway, and there's a big hope being placed in Namibia that Germany might improve later, okay, depending on the process, on the way it's implemented. The big problem that I've got personally in being an accountant is by spreading that amount over 30 years, the effect per year could obviously be reduced. But there have been talks, and I've been assured by members, and I remember the forum has been talking to everybody in this process except the German government. Maybe we will still have the opportunity to talk to them, but currently we have not engaged with them. But members of the Namibian negotiation team have assured us that the bulk of that amount will take place in the first 5 years, so that one can see the effect relatively quickly. And I'm happy to say that the German chief negotiator, Mr. Ruprecht Polenz, was quoted in social media. He had an interview with a German prominent magazine, Der Spiegel, who pick up a lot of political scandals in Germany. They are instrumental in the German political scene, whereby he also said that the majority of the funds would flow in the first few years. Because if you take a duly straight line over 30 years, it takes a whole generation to benefit from this thing. And I think in order to reconcile the German-speaking community and the Herero and Nama-speaking communities of Namibia, we need to see the effects and the benefits of that financial compensation package to flow quickly.
We'll get to that in a slight bit. I just want to take you back to the three goals that were achieved according to you. One is the purported acknowledgement of a genocide from today's perspective. That phrase in itself is also problematic.
It's problematic and it's highly controversial, and I can't speak on behalf of the German government, but I think they are relying on the fact that the genocide declaration, I haven't got the right word now, that the United Nations declaration on the genocide was signed in 1948 or 1949. And these unfortunate events that we are talking about now were obviously way before that. So they are saying from today's perspective, taking that UN convention, I think is the right word, of 1949 into account, it would be tantamount to a genocide.
But the events were no less a genocide then as they are now.
Yes, correct.
Now, some opposition parties, as well as descendants of the genocide, have outrightly rejected the offer, as you also referred to earlier. Do you believe that their concerns are valid, seeing that many of them still live in abject poverty today?
Once again, very difficult question. There have been various reactions to this whole contentious issue. The one was that certain members of the affected communities opted for litigation. Now, if you opt for litigation, it's very difficult to subsequently join a process of negotiation. And we know that certain members of the affected communities, I'm not saying all, certain members of the affected communities through certain representatives took part in the negotiation process. And you may also not disregard the fact that the chief negotiator for Namibia was the late Dr. Z. Ngabirwa, who was, from what I remember in 2015, applauded and congratulated for his appointment by everybody in the Ovo Herero community, because he was a very respected politician. May his soul rest in peace. So I think that is the assumption or the perception that Germany made when they went into these negotiations, is that it was a bilateral negotiation process, and each bilateral party, the Federal Republic of Germany and the Republic of Namibia, had their prerogative of constituting their own negotiation parties, or the teams of the negotiation party. So yes, I think it is a fact of life that a lot of the affected communities feel underrepresented, but they are also underrepresented in the National Assembly, for starters, because of their smaller numbers that they represent.
Another fact of life, Mr. Hecht, is that some are of the view that this joint declaration was in fact the joke of the century. What do you make of that contention?
Yeah, joke of the century depends on the expectations that you've got. You know, if you've packed certain expectations on the outcome, and the outcome is far less than what you've expected, and you've sensitized your supporters that they can expect a lot of a bigger financial or monetary reward, then obviously the outcome is disappointing. But I must say, there have also been talks of people that are satisfied with the outcome, and maybe they are not as loud and as vocal as the others that reject it. But I must also say that the whole process took place 6 years, and there have also been talks from Germany that, you know, they will not renegotiate on the matter. So what do you take of this? Do you take the 1.1 billion that is euros that is on the table, or do you just disregard it? Then also we've had talks from the Forum of German-speaking Namibians with people in favor of the agreement, but obviously also with people that are against the agreement.
Now, given these two schools of thought, sir,
yes,
what would you as a forum like to see for the future of these talks from the forum's perspective?
that we can look at finding the best common denominator. Everyone is happy, Germany is happy, Namibia is happy, the affected communities are happy, and that we can move forward and that we can start the dialogue of reconciliation. Because that's going to take us another 20, 30, 40, 50 years, is the dialogue and the reconciliation process that has to happen.
Is that possible?
It's difficult, but we have to. We've got no other choice than going that route.
It's time for another brief break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is your weekly dose of One-on-One with me, Den Kisting. Our guest tonight, Mr. Harald Hecht, Chairman, Forum of the German-Speaking Namibians. So, another bone of contention relates to land. And one of the main threats by descendants of the Herero Nama people who are unhappy with the joint declaration is that if they are not fully compensated, they will grab the land of German-speaking Namibians. What do you make of that?
I followed those reports in the press. That was in June and July, and we issued a press release at the time, and we described it as unfortunate because we are saying that German-speaking Namibians are also protected under the rule of law in Namibia. We've got per the constitution, we've got a right to property. But lately we have not heard those threats, they have not been as vocal as they were in June, July. Yes, it's obviously a big point of concern to the German-speaking community of Namibia, and in particular the farming community.
What are you doing about the concern?
We are trying to discuss this matter first within the German-speaking community to get their views. Okay. Now, a lot of the farming community in Namibia have been very hesitant in joining the forum for whatever reason. Maybe the COVID factor in June, July was also such that people were had other priorities at the time. But I must say, lately we've been contacted by members of the German-speaking farming community who want to sit down with us, and this is actually what we welcome. We want to have a representative forum of all the German-speaking community members of Namibia, and then we will look at finding solutions to all these sensitive issues.
Speaking about becoming a representative community, how many members do you have at the moment?
We've got 140 members, but bearing in mind that we started on our inaugural meeting was on 22 April 2021, so it's currently close to 6 months ago, but then we had a big interruption due to COVID-19 in June and July.
140. So how big is the German-speaking community in Namibia?
That is also a difficult question, because you've got a lot of people that have got German as a foreign language and then German mother tongue. I think at independence the figure stood at around 25,000. It's currently been reduced. There are probably around 15,000 German-speaking members in Namibia.
There is a notion that the willing buyer, willing seller principle as far as it relates to land has not been very successful. What is your take on that, sir?
Yes, that is... look, I must say that after independence there has also been a lot of change in the ownership complexity or structure of farms. A lot of former previously disadvantaged members or politicians for that matter have been able to buy commercial land. So the German dominance in the farmland has already been slightly reduced since independence, but obviously if you look at the typical commercial farmland, the German-speaking community still very much actively and probably owns the majority of that. The willing buyer, willing seller principle, I'm not sure whether there's an alternative to that. And if so, one would have to address the consequences of that. And now we've had 2 land conferences, and I think the last one was October 2018. So we've got resettlement farms. Some of them are working well, some of them are not working so well. And I think the government has rightfully changed the laws that foreign ownership is becoming very limited. So the absentee landlords that are sitting in Germany, sometimes CEOs of big family companies that have just got a farm for pleasure basically in Namibia, that has basically been ironed out through legislation. That is very difficult to buy farmland now from that point of view. So I think over time we will see a better balanced ownership of commercial farmland.
We've not seen it thus far. And hearing you say that there aren't any alternatives to the willing buyer, willing seller principle, how can we expedite land reform?
By making more money available from the government side, and by changing the laws, which we've done. As I mentioned, that the German absentee landlords are no more a real factor. There are still some of them that are still part of existing structures, but over time it will become difficult for a German national to buy a farmland in Namibia. Okay, and the local German-speaking Namibians, you may not forget, are also actually part and parcel of Namibia. I mean, if I take my family as an example, I'm in the 4th generation living in Namibia, and my grandchild that was born a week ago is now the 6th generation. So it's not that we've moved into Namibia 30 years ago and just taking advantage of our commercial and financial means. So that is also a reality that you have to consider.
Why are you saying that there are no alternatives to that principle?
Because our right to property is guaranteed in terms of our constitution.
So you'd also mentioned that the forum would engage in, amongst others, matters of national importance in the areas of politics, the economy, legal matters, culture, education, and matters affecting our society as a whole. How do you think that approach will quell the brewing tension?
First and foremost, we need to get the trust within the German-speaking community, gather their views in Namibia, and then start with the dialogue process. We've started that. As I said, as far as the genocide topic was concerned, we've spoken to members that were unhappy with the arrangements and with members that were part of the negotiation team. And I think that's the least we can do, is to talk to each other and find the biggest common denominator on which we can build and keep the social peace in Namibia. It's obviously a daunting task, and it requires a certain level of tolerance from all parties involved.
Returning to those negotiations, would you agree that all of those negotiations, the purported apology as well as the purported reparations, took a very long time, in fact, over 100 years, for Germany to acknowledge what had happened. Is that also your view?
Yes, I've been trying to go back and trying to establish, I think the first time that motion was tabled was 2006 by the late Paramount Chief Kwame Harald, and obviously before that there was a build-up. But I think the simple fact that Namibia only became independent in 1990, only then this issue started becoming topical shortly thereafter. You know, that people said, no, there's also been a genocide in our country, let's address it. Before 1990 we were still governed by South Africa, and I don't think we had the jurisdiction, and we could have established in bilateral talks with Germany. It was only possible after 1990, because then we were our own elected country with our own constitution, our own jurisdiction, and only then the movement started that we have to talk about this issue.
What damage did it cause to only be able to deal with the issue at that late stage?
You see, that is the problem that we've got as German-speaking Namibians in our beautiful country. We are here to stay, and we want to keep the social peace. I'm saying it for the third time tonight, but it is so important because we've got no other home. We want to stay in this country just as much as every other Namibian, and there are wounds. Getting to the result of this prolonged process of over 100 years, there are wounds, and there needs to be healing of wounds process, which we need to address. And this is why we as a forum are of the view, let's take this joint declaration as a starting point, let's maximize on where we can maximize, but let's start with the process of reconciliation, because that will take us a number of years, and we need those wounds to heal.
As we wrap up, how would that healing look like in practice?
Well, that is something that we have to discuss. We have to sit with the affected communities. We have to become visible. A lot of German-speaking members of the Namibian community are already involved in a lot of projects for the betterment of Namibia. The German-speaking community, through the common German language, is in a position to bring investors to this country, to promote Namibia as an investor-friendly country, to establish Namibia as an attractive business location. All these things are also ultimately then in the national interest. And I said it earlier, the national reconciliation slogan of One Namibia, One Nation is what we need to focus on again.
What do you regard as the national interest, Mr. Hecht?
The national interest is that we close the Gini coefficient, that we provide housing to all Namibians, that all Namibians can lead a decent life with a roof over their heads, and that we can eradicate poverty in this country once and for all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes this week's edition of One on One. Good night.